This is the number one reason why people just stay in debt. One, they don't have leverage. They're leveraging other people's money, and it's other people who are making money on that leverage.
Rich people don't spend their cash. They spend the leverage. So why couldn't you do the same? We are so used to doing things a certain way. We are so used to paying, our income coming in, our bills being paid, our monthly payments being addressed, and whatever's left over, we do what we need to do with whatever's left over. Some of us get it compounding, some of us throw it into savings, some of us spend it. But the idea behind this strategy is, what if we simply were able to take our leverage dollars to pay our bills and put our income towards creating more employees for us, getting our money working, compounding our money. So that's really, it's really more about the strategy, because this is not a one size fits all. This is very unique, and it's specific to the individual. Your freedom number looks different from my freedom number, and your process of getting there looks different from my process for getting there. So it's really more about the strategy. If you can grasp the strategy. Last week or Sunday, we talked about doing a reverse velocity banking concept or strategy. And we use a gentleman by the name of Abel, 25 years of age, makes about $50,000 a year, and he's putting away about 10% of his income. 10% of $50,000 is $5,000 a year. And the idea is he wants his freedom number. And so the concept was, instead of going the traditional means of calculating or finding that freedom number, is there a better way? Is there a different way? Hence, we kind of coined it as reverse velocity banking. So it's kind of hard to talk about reverse velocity banking until we talk about what velocity banking is in general. So what is velocity banking? And again, there are many channels that cover this. We cover it from time to time, mainly because it's a strategy that I understand. It's a strategy that kind of we use to help jumpstart where we were headed. But the bottom line is, your income comes in. And when that income comes in, where does it normally go? It goes into your checking account. And when that income goes into your checking account, you traditionally pay bills from there. And then whatever's left over, you end up throwing it into savings or spending it or whatever the case may be. But from a velocity banking perspective, it's a little bit different. Income goes into your checking account and immediately goes on to a debt tool. That debt tool can be anything from a credit card, a line of credit, home equity line of credit, business line of credit, personal line of credit. There are many different debt tools you can use, but the thought process is this. You're going to use this debt tool to then pay your bills from there. And when you do that, what that allows you to do is it allows you to kind of get multiple uses out of a dollar. High level, if I make $5,000 and my bills are $4,000, as I put all of my income onto that debt tool, and let's say it's a credit card that's maxed out at $10,000. When I put all of my income, the $5,000 onto that debt tool, it brings the balance down from $10,000 to $5,000. But then when I pay bills from that debt tool, the cash flow, that $1,000 that's left over lives on the debt tool, and it's that cash flow that ends up breaking down or knocking down the balance on this tool, which allows me to then have a weapon that I can use to go attack more debt. And then the idea is this cash flow, as I mentioned, lives here. Well, the reason that's so important as it relates to the clients that I work with, and that is, when you free up that cash flow, unless you put that money to work, you can put yourself in a situation where you can cause things to end up back where they were. Meaning, if you don't put that money to work, what else are you going to do with it other than spend it? And so the thought process is, then what? What do you do with that cash flow once it's freed up? And the concept that we like to do is take that debt tool or the income, the cash flow coming from that debt tool, and we move it to some type of wealth generating tool. Ultimately, we get it compounding. And so there's many ways of going about it, but we talk a lot about a secure compound interest account in the form of premium finance strategy, also known as MPI. So it's getting that cash flow into a vehicle where it can actually start working for you. Well, as we talk about reverse velocity banking, how is that any different? Well, again, from a velocity banking perspective, it's taking the cash flow from the debt tool and moving that to a wealth generating tool, putting that money to work. Well, the concept here is kind of going the opposite direction. It's putting your money first onto the wealth tool and then leveraging the income from that wealth tool. So again, as your money still comes into your checking account as normal, you're placing that income into your wealth generating tool, some type of secure compound interest account. And then as that cash value continues to grow, you then transition that cash value into a position where that can pay your bills. Well, why is that important? Well, if you're using leveraged money to pay your bills, 9 times out of 10, you're using tax-free dollars tax-free dollars, leverage dollars is the word I was trying to find, leverage dollars to be able to pay your bills, and your cash, the money that you are growing inside of this vehicle, is continuing to work for you, which ultimately will translate into a lifetime of income. So in essence, we're taking a wealth tool and transitioning that income from that wealth tool, leveraging the income in the wealth tool to then pay your bills. And that's high level what that looks like. But I also wanted to dig into a little bit of the details as to where this concept is coming from and why it's even an option. Traditionally, Abel, the gentleman that we were doing this example on, he's making about $50,000 a year, and he would pay his bills, pay his debts, and then whatever's left over is what he decided to get compounding. And so in the thought process was, okay, this is how most of us address our savings or anything that we're putting away to be able to produce income for us, with the exception of our company's 401k. A company's 401k is one of the few or traditional retirement plans are one of the few vehicles that we tend to pay ourselves first with, meaning we take in before that income comes to us, that income goes into that vehicle and starts building wealth for us. Well, the thought process is, what if we could do that outside of a traditional retirement vehicle? But traditionally, this is what happens. We take our cash flow, and then whatever's left over, that dollar amount that we're deciding to put away to build for us, is what we end up using inside of our wealth building vehicle. So moral of the story is, the pay ourselves first isn't really paying ourselves first. We end up paying our bills and our debts first, and then whatever's left over is what we use to then get our wealth building started. But what if we just looked at this from a different perspective? What if we took a different approach? And that approach being, what if you could put all of your income into the wealth building tool? And obviously you have to build up the enough cash flow to be able to get there. That is not something you can just start off, right off the bat doing. It's something you have to build up to. So what if you could take all of the income that you have? In this case, Abel makes $50,000 a year. Take all $50,000, put it into that wealth building vehicle. And as cash flow builds inside this vehicle, then those bills that you have to pay, mortgage, debt, anything related to life in general, those bills end up getting paid by the leverage dollars. And this, just so we're clear, this isn't a new concept. This isn't something that we magically came up with or something that we are experimenting with. If you were to just simply go to Google and put into the search bar, how does Warren Buffett pay less taxes than his secretary? Or a better one would be, how do rich people pay less taxes? Like, what are the steps that rich people pay to pay less taxes? And what will come up is right here. According to buy, borrow, and die strategy, leveraging assets as collateral allows you to borrow money while preserving the value of the underlying asset. What that's basically saying is, rich people don't spend their cash. They spend the leverage. So they use their cash and they place it into an asset that's actually building wealth for them. And then they leverage that asset, meaning they borrow against that. And that's what they use to buy, and that's what they spend with. So why couldn't you do the same? Why couldn't you have your own asset that's building wealth over time, and then you leverage that asset to be able to pay your expenses? Like, this is not foreign. It's just something that we've been conditioned not to do. We've been conditioned to spend our money as it comes, and then whatever's left over, we put that in a position to hopefully work for us to produce our retirement, whatever the case may be. What if we just reversed it? What if we do what the wealthy have already been doing? And that's the thought process for today. Again, it's about the strategy. It's the strategy of simply looking at this from a different perspective and leverage and using your cash to fund an asset, and then leveraging the growth of that asset to actually pay your bills. Again, just to kind of reiterate the performance of what this looks like, it's a wealth strategy compared to an investment strategy. Meaning the vehicle that we're talking about is a vehicle that we can maybe not eliminate the risk, but at least reduce the risk. Because if we can reduce the risk, we can actually build wealth and build uninterrupted compound interest, versus every other strategy we are indoctrinated with. whether it's your 401k, an IRA, a 403b, a TSP, real estate, you name it. There's some form of risk there, and that performance of up and down performance in the stock market, that average of those wins and losses, that straight line of performance is the reason why everyone ends up poor. But the objective is if we can reduce the risk, and that's where a secure compound interest account comes into play. If we can reduce the risk, we can put ourselves in position to where we can actually build enough wealth to be able to use that leverage to pay our bills. So again, conceptually, that's what that looks like. We started here with Abel putting away making $50,000 a year, putting away 10% of his income, which is $5,000 into a secure compound interest producing vehicle. And we let that compound for the next 10 years. Well, in the process of letting that compound for the next 10 years, there was a few things that we came up with. One was at that 10-year mark, inside of that secure compound interest producing vehicle that he was putting away $5,000 a year, he had achieved cash value of right around $73,000. That remaining 45, what did we do with it? That remaining 45 at year 10, that remaining 45, we split up that remaining 45 and got it compounding. Meaning we truly paid ourselves first. We first took our $50,000 and got it into a secure we paid the $5,000 that we had started 10 years ago. And then we took the remaining $45,000 and also put it to work. So it took us 10 years to get to a point where we could honestly pay ourselves first. Until then, up until that 10-year mark, we were doing what he was always doing what most of us do. Income would come in. We would pay bills from that income, and that remaining, what was left over, we were getting it compounding in a secure compound interest producing vehicle. So it took us 10 years to get to a point where we could actually step back and assess whether or not we could actually start paying ourselves first officially. And that's kind of what this point is at year 10, age 35, taking this $50,000 of income, getting $5,000 into a secure compound producing vehicle, and then splitting the rest into another, and then leveraging the cash value that was accumulated in that secure compound interest producing vehicle to pay our bills. And what was our bills? $45,000. So we're going to borrow $45,000 from the cash value that's been accumulated in this vehicle to pay our bills in year 10. And once those bills are paid, we now have the remaining income to get to work. But when we borrowed this $45,000, it was not borrowed for free. It was borrowed at 4%. So that cost of borrowing has to be addressed. And that's what this is. All I'm saying here is the $50,000 that's caught up in this cash value is not moving. It didn't go anywhere. It's still here. That $50,000 is still growing at some rate. And it's growing on average around 7%, which is about $3,500. This $4,500 that I had taken out, $45,000 that I had taken out to pay bills throughout that year, there was a cost to that $45,000. That cost is 4%. 4% of $45,000 is $1,800. $3,500 on the money that I've grown inside of this secure compound interest account, minus the $1,800 that it cost me to leverage this 45, leaves me a net interest earned of about $1,700. And I'm making a lot of assumptions here. I'm assuming that this net of $1,700 of performance is, I have an average growth of 7%. That average growth is including any down, I'll call it down markets that might happen. So there's a lot of assumptions being made here. But my point is this, that net average or the net interest earned in this first year is carried throughout the next 10 years. And throughout the next 10 years, I'm accumulating interest and I'm accumulating leverage throughout that 10-year period. Meaning if I'm borrowing $45,000 a year, someone's going to have to pay that $45,000 back. In the first 10 years, we were leveraging $45,000 from the secure compound interest account that we created. Year 10, we also opened up a second secure compound interest account. And so we had our first one that was performing, and then we also had our second one that performed for the next 10 years. So within from year 10 to year 20, we would have accumulated cash value of about $280K in the first policy, which would end up producing about $31,000 at the end of that 20-year period. We would have borrowed over that 10-year period $45,000 every year. So we would have borrowed 45 times 10, $450,000 is the amount that would have been borrowed during that period. And as I mentioned, interest earned, the net interest earned would have been $1,700 over that 10-year period, which is about $170,000. 17,000. That's wrong. Anyway, the net interest would be about 17,000. So we borrowed 450,000 and the net interest would be about 17,000. And then in policy 2, during that 10-year period from year 10 to year 20, we would have accumulated, putting in $35,000 a year, cash value of about 500,000 and net income of about 52. And it's at this point where we no longer have to worry about borrowing against our policy. And the reason we don't have to worry about borrowing at this point is because both policies are producing sufficient enough income therefore we don't have to. So at this point, not only can we pay ourselves first by putting all of our income back into our secure compound interest account, we now also have enough income being generated in that secure compound interest account that would allow us to now pay our bills. That would allow us to be able to pay that $45,000 in expenses year after year after year. And then lastly, it brought us to year 30. And this was just, if we were to continue that performance, if we were to continue taking that $45,000 in income between both policies for the next 10 years and continue still contributing to those policies, the amount of cash value in them continues to grow. And as the amount of cash value continues to grow, the amount of income that we're able to take continues to grow. So at that 30-year period, we're talking about in the first policy, about $81,000 in income compared to the second policy, which is a ridiculous $215,000 in annual income. So between these two, not only have we hit our freedom number, but 9 times out of 10 with income like that, we have now set our legacy on a course for what the next 500 years are going to look like. And in addition, we're probably on some island somewhere living a wonderful life.
Or we're bringing other people with us, right? Hopefully anybody who is doing a strategy like this and they can see it working in their lives, which is us, jumps out there to each one teach one, right? So we do have one question before you move forward, because I know where you're going. Kelly says, you have the 10K left over, right? 1, why couldn't you just put that 10K in? So why didn't you do that? And then 2, that's not what she asked, but that's what she didn't ask. And then 2 is, what's the best vehicle to put that into so the 10K is also put to work? It's a great question.
So let's talk about it. And for that, I need to kind of just highlight it. So it's sitting right here. I've got this $50,000 that I put $5,000 into the original policy, and then I've got 45 left over. Why didn't I just put all 45 into that second policy? Like, why not? There's room. Why not? Well, there's rules to this game. And one of those rules is making sure you do have the ability to put in as much as you can. So if we were to look at, this is 10 years later. So this is a 35-year-old making $50,000 a year. We all have this thing called max insurability. That max insurability is based off our age, and actually it's a multiplier times our income that determines what that max insurability is. And for a 35-year-old, it just happens to be 35. So 35 times your income is the maximum amount of life insurance you can qualify for. That's number one. And then in addition to that, there's a maximum amount that you can contribute. And that has a formula as well. That formula is the max you can contribute is approximately 40 times your income plus an additional 50% of your savings. And the thought process is this: the last thing the life insurance company, last thing that I as a fiduciary want you to do is cause yourself to become over leveraged or put yourself in a position where you can't sustain this for the rest of your life. And so therefore, that maximum amount you can contribute has to be taken into consideration. And so if we're talking about a gentleman at 35 making $50,000 in income, then what's 40% of $50,000? 40% of $50,000 is 20 grand. So 4 times 5. 4 times 5 is 20. So that's $20,000 is the maximum in income that he can contribute. But the remaining 50, he can't contribute more than 50% of his savings. Well, I'm making the assumption that he spends what he makes. So I'm making the assumption that at age 35, his only savings is whatever's left over in that $50,000. And so if he uses 20 of it as income contribution, the remaining 30,000 is his savings. So the max he can contribute is 50% of that 30,000. So 20,000 plus 50% of 30,000 is 35 grand. So that's where the 35 grand came into play, or that's where the 35,000, or that's why I had identified it being a max of 35,000 is what he can contribute in that second policy. And so to your point, what could he have done with that remaining 10,000? And I wrote some things here because I think there's many options. There's a high yield savings, get that 10,000 compounding in a high yield savings account. I haven't heard this question yet, but when the questions start around paying back the loan, the 450,000 that he's taken over that first 10 years that was never paid back, when those questions start, what about putting that $10,000 towards paying back the loan, or maybe even just paying the interest, even though the interest is compensated for? But still, that $10,000 can absolutely, in some way, shape, or form, go back into that secure compound interest account, and at a minimum, drive the balance on the borrowed amount down. No harm in that. So to your point, or what can you do with it? I think you have many options. And what I was just trying to also say is, things happen. He has to buy a car, has to fix a roof. Want to take a vacation. So there's $10,000 that's there to be able to do whatever it is you want to do. So I'm not handcuffing him and dumping all of this money in, but I am trying to get the maximum amount or the maximum amount of growth inside of this vehicle. So there were some assumptions that I had to make through this. And one of them was around income and expense changes. I had to just keep things level, meaning I'm treating this as though from age 25 to age 55, he never made another dime more than $50,000 a year. But we all know from at least 25 to 35, there may have been some promotion in there, right? And I could have added this, but I just wanted to keep things clean because it's about the concept. It's really less about the math. It's more about conceptually, do you understand the strategy? Do you understand that today we are used to spending our cash on bills and debts and then taking the rest and putting it to work? But if we were truly following the pay yourself first concept, then the idea would be, at what point are we getting to a place where we have enough leverage dollars to be able to pay our bills? And that way we can truly pay ourselves first and get everything else compounding. If you can just understand that strategy, that was the point. So I didn't want to add any other variables to confuse that. And then inflation. Inflation is a simple one. So if you notice, I got $5,000 compounding, and I allowed that secure compound interest account to compound for 10 years. Well, 10 years was $73,000, and he leveraged a portion of that $73,000 to pay his bills. Well, I could have started sooner, meaning it took 10 years to accumulate $73,000 of cash value. Why didn't I start when he had accumulated $50,000 of cash value? My main purpose was I wanted to give his money enough time to compound to compensate for inflation. So what would inflation look like? If Abel was making $45,000, and what would he need in 10 years to equate to the same 45,000? So it's 45,000 times 3%. We're talking about $60,000. So in 10 years, in order to compensate for inflation, then what Abel really and truly needed to be withdrawing starting at the 10-year period, or leveraging at the 10-year period, looks more like $60,000. Well, he had 63. I'm sorry, 63. He had 73 in cash value. So could he have leveraged $60,000 at that point? Absolutely he could. And then in addition, we started a second policy. So if the following year he needed to leverage another $60,000, would he have been able to? Absolutely. So I left enough room in the actions that I had taken to compensate for inflation as well. So it is absolutely very important for us to account for inflation, which is why when we walk through the steps, I kind of highlight that again. In using this calculator, all I'm doing, I'm sitting at calculator.net. And it's the forward flat rate inflation calculator is what we're using to be able to calculate that. And I'm using a flat 3%. So, yes, inflation could be higher, could be lower. I'm just using a flat 3%. But my point is, these numbers in this example are compensating for all of that. And especially once you get to year 20, it's game on. Because in year 20, you've got well over $80,000 available to you in tax-free income that you're able to leverage from your policy and not even borrow. So we're talking about income being produced from the policy, and that compensates for inflation as well. And then the last one is market fluctuations. I did cover this one on Sunday, And I can absolutely do it again if it was lost in the sauce. But the bottom line is, as it relates to market fluctuations, I did not compensate for it inside of this vehicle, because my thought process was I just wanted to get the concept out. But how do you account for market fluctuations? It's the same in every example that I've ever done since you guys have been on this channel. And that is, we have a 0% floor inside this product. And because of the money is sitting in what's called the general fund, meaning because of that 0% floor, there's a contractual guarantee that the money that you put inside of this policy can't be lost. If we run into a situation where there is a market downturn, then it's all compensated for internally and you're never experiencing it. So your dollar will never be affected. But anyway, we can get into that if there's any more questions around it. And the issue of being over leveraged. And again, this goes back to that $450,000 that we had borrowed over that first 10-year period. This dollar amount right here. I have zero plans on paying that $450,000 back. But if you noticed, at that 30-year mark, I could pay it off in my sleep if I wanted to. But I have zero plans in doing so. Why? You have to remember Abel's goal. Where in Abel's goal did it say he wanted to be debt free? It didn't. Abel's goal was retire early. Abel's goal was to generate enough income so that he could have his freedom number and potentially fire his job. And so as a result, that leveraged $450,000 will be addressed, but will happen to be addressed in his death benefit. And so what that means is once Abel passes, yes, there is going to be $450,000 plus whatever interest there may be that is going to eat into his death benefit. We are knowingly and accepting of this aspect of what Abel's trying to do, because Abel has zero plans on. Abel's not concerned on what the death benefit is. Now, that might be different for you though, and that's where I go back to. This is not a one size fits all. This is specific to this gentleman. Those of us who do care about legacy, then how would we address that $450,000 outstanding loan? There's a way of going about it, because there's so much income being generated by year 30 that, again, we have the means to be able to do so. But again, it's not a one size fits all. And what we would like to do next, I guess once we get through a few questions, but what I'd like to do next is kind of walk through some of the steps that you would need to take to be able to accomplish that.
So it's okay if that is your goal, that you want to be financially secure so that somebody else who is not, it does not have to become a burden to you, or that you do not have to become a burden to somebody else. And no judgment. This is just where people are. And our goal is to meet people where they are, to provide solutions or find out where your point of leverage is, right? Kelvin does have a question though, and it is about that loan. So I do want to add this because I think there's a lot of people who are going to have the same question. So you said you weren't going to pay it back, but he says, if that loan isn't paid back, how is interest charged every year?
So as I mentioned, in year 11, when you borrow $45,000 from this 73 in cash value, what's happening with your 50,000? Your 50,000 is making on average 7%. On average. So that's, sometimes it's zero, sometimes it's more, but on average 7%. And the money that you leverage is 45,000. You're not leveraging it for free. You leverage it at 4%. So this is the first year. So in the first year, when you borrowed that 50,000 and you paid your bills, I didn't pay back the 50,000. I'm sorry, the 45. When you borrowed the 45,000 and paid your bills, that my bills are now zeroed out. I didn't pay back the 45,000. But what happened with that interest, that 4% interest? 4% of 45,000 is 1,800. Well, if my money inside of my policy is making money and the leverage money cost me 18, the difference between the two is my net interest earned. So in year one, when I did this, do I have negative interest or do I have positive interest? I have positive, because I'm actually making money inside my policy. And I think the piece that this isn't necessarily Kelvin, but the piece that a lot of people who pay close attention to whole life policies, this is the piece that's missing. In a whole life policy, when you leverage against a whole life policy, do you make money inside the policy when you borrow from it? 9 times out of 10, if not 99 times out of 100, when you borrow money out of a whole life policy, you're losing money in the policy, because it's making 4%, but it costs you 5 to leverage your money. It's making 4%, it costs you 8% to leverage your money, which means the minute you grab that $45,000, you're losing money in the policy. The minute I grab this $45,000 out of this policy, am I losing money in the policy? I'm not. Now, did I address the $45,000? I didn't. But from an interest perspective, I am still positive interest this year. Next year, the market does okay, I'm positive interest. Next year, the market does okay, I'm positive interest. The year after that, the market doesn't do okay. Okay, what happens if the market does not do okay? That's this part. I borrowed that my $50,000 was supposed to make 7%. It didn't. It made 0. But I still owed 4% on the $45,000 that I leveraged. So I owe 18. Well, when you look at the cash value, when you look at my cash value plus the leveraged dollar amount, those are $2 amounts sitting in the general fund. Okay, my $73,000, that interest that was covered the previous years isn't covered. So, okay, I owe $1,800 to the life insurance company. Well, there's two things that occur inside of a properly designed product. These two things that occur do not occur inside of a whole life policy. So you can't do this. So inside this policy, what happens is when the life insurance company understands how compound interest works. So here's what they say. Hey, we're going to defer all interest payments until you die. That's the first thing they're going to say. But then the second thing they're going to do is, hey, to keep track of things, we need to make sure that we acknowledge the interest and how much is owed. So what's going to happen is it's a ledger move. So if my cash value is $73,000 and I'm leveraging $110 from the life insurance company, and we now owe the life insurance company $1,800, we're going to move $1,800 from my side of the bucket, from my side of the general fund, over to the life insurance company side of the general fund. When I do this, the money that I just borrowed just became self-collateralized. And because I've done that, now I can borrow the same amount next year. Had I not done that, the loan would not be self-collateralized, and the life insurance company would not feel comfortable allowing me to leverage this money again. But when I do that, and again, this all happens internally, we never even noticed it. But once I do that, I have now satisfied the interest for that year. Well, when you add my cash value and the leverage cash value together, did my accumulation value change? What do I mean by accumulation value? Accumulation value is the money that's working for you that allows me to generate this cash value. So the amount of money working for me never change. If you add these $2 amounts together, they are the same. They equal the same amount, and they're still in my bucket. Now, I have not addressed the $450,000, just so we're clear. But from an interest perspective, how is my policy imploding? What you're showing is an outstanding loan balance. But there's not interest compounding that's eating up my policy. But if you do this inside of a whole life policy, though, you do this exact same process inside of a whole life policy, it does implode.